I'm Brandon Winerdy. I write for StarWars.com, Star Wars Insider. I wrote the new Star Wars Encyclopedia that just came out. And I'm here. It's not about me. It's about this man right here, Academy Award winner, Roger Christian, everybody. Please give it up one more time. The father of the lightsaber. How are you? How's the Texas heat for you? How do you feel?
It's very nice. Actually, Toronto was hotter. We're having Delhi heat. Yeah, it's climate change is working.
Sure.
So it was like 40 degrees.
Which is, does anyone know Celsius to Fahrenheit?
That's
I'm bad at
probably nearly 100.
nearly 100. See, I'm a Texas boy. I've known nothing. Well, okay, we all know Roger, but I'm going to go through a quick amount of accolades, and we're going to dive right into his career, which is obviously Academy Award winner for the original Star Wars, also nominated for the original Alien. Talk about iconic franchises. There are a lot of props that a lot of you have replicas of, that everyone loves, that Roger had a direct hand in, and we're going to talk through as many as possible. There might be time for questions at the end, so if I don't hit anything, you let me know, and we can talk through that too. But before we even dive into Star Wars, I love to just ask, what got you into the film industry? What inspired you growing up to even want to be a creative person like this?
I didn't know anything about it. I would drag my mother to Saturday morning cinema, and that's about it. I didn't know this existed until two things happened. I was at art school. I hated school, and I managed to get out without my father knowing and go to an art school. He thought I was still going to school, retook all my exams, and my mate at art school had bought an old Jaguar for, I think, £15, nothing. And we drove to London like kings in it and saw, for the first time, I went to a huge cinema in Leicester Square and saw Dr. Zhivago, and I literally had an out-of-body experience. I was so moved by this ancient epic. It was huge. And a few months later, because I'd run out of money, I was putting up marquees all over the south of England. As students, we were doing it. And I saw this prison camp. And I thought, wow, what are they doing? Why is there a prison camp being built in the forest? So I went across and asked them, and they said, it's a film set. And I went, what is that? So they said, well, it's Pinewood Studios. So, of course, I went. I couldn't get in the studios. I found a hole, dug under, and got in. And they happened to be shooting a James Bond movie. And the doors were open, and the smell and the lights. And I realized, wow, this is something you could do. And then in the prop room, I found gold bars, and I was looking at them, and I realized they were plaster, and then all the stuff. So I said, that's it. I got to do this. And pursued it for a year. Writing letters. I knew nothing. I knew nobody. I didn't know anything about the film industry. And one man producer recommended I could go into the art department because I studied art for 3 years. But he said, you'll need architecture. So in blind kind of faith, I managed to get into Oxford School of Architecture. I did 2 years there, got my diploma, and the principal, who I got to know, said, now you better go and do what you really want, because you're going to be bored stiff the next 2 years. And by writing letters, and I got an appointment with a man called Charlie Bishop at Elstree Studios, met him, he looked at my work and said, I would take you on in a heartbeat, but we're just finishing Department S. It's a TV series. He said, I've made you an appointment. Could you go on Thursday to Shepperton Studios? I went down. I met John Box, who designed Dr. Zhivago. It was like destiny. I was like Luke finding
Excalibur.
Exactly, the lightsaber. And he took me on as tea boy. And British drink tea, especially the film industry. So I was making tea and coffee all day long until I'd convinced them all that I could draw, and I started to make worse and worse tea. I'd watch them grimace when I gave it to them, thinking I either get fired or I'll get promoted. And I got promoted, and that was it. That set me off running then.
We're all learning, 1, sneak into a James Bond set, 2, go to Oxford, and then 3, make bad tea, and you can be just like you. That's great.
There you go.
How did you then get involved with John Barry and the original Star Wars?
So I was called out to Mexico on a film called Lucky Lady. It was the huge movie, huge, and it was going over budget and over schedule. So there were three of them in the art department, John Barry, Les Dilly, and Norman Reynolds, and they called me out to come and help. And it was written by Gloria and Willard Hike, who we became great friends with. They wrote American Graffiti, and they were writing some of the dialogue for George for Star Wars uncredited, because they were all at college together. When George was hired by Alan Ladd to try and revive the studio for the audience, he came in with their worst nightmare, which was a science fiction fantasy film for children, which there was no box office for. But Alan Ladd continued to promote him and said this film, they had it analyzed, would make $12 million at the box office. We'll give you $4 million, a third of it. If you can make your film for $4 million, we'll finance it. And Britain was half the price of America. Gary Kurtz had got the budget down to 8. And so 20th Century Fox in London said, we can make the movie for 4. And we also had studios free. So Gloria and Willard said, listen, you keep talking about a spaghetti western in space. They're converting old Mexican buildings, and Roger and John are doing what you want. So the car arrived. I was dressing a salt factory, because salt had a lot of value in those early days. And here comes George. We were all like students, honestly. And George and Gary arrived. George, exactly white sneakers, jeans, and one plaid shirt. And he only traveled with 2 plaid shirts. That's all he ever wore. And he started explaining to me about the science fiction movie, and he actually picked up a shovel and helped me shovel salt while we were talking, which is George. And I said, I have to be honest, I didn't like Flash Gordon. I don't like science fiction films that have plastic guns that go beep and there's nothing real. And that's when he said to me, I want to make a spaghetti western in space. Now, my favorite filmmaker, and still is Kurosawa. And Sergio Leone remade all of the samurai movies into spaghetti westerns. So I knew what he wanted without having to be explained. So we were hired, John Barry and I, there and then. That's where Star Wars began, in Mexico, in Guaymas.
Like third employee, right? Third crew member really hired for Star Wars, early employee.
That was us. And in fact, the DP, who then couldn't do it, Jeffrey Unsworth, who's wonderful, and I wish he could have done it, because the one who did it was an awful human being. But he was. He hated George. At the first day of shooting, George was looking through the viewfinder. He'd made American Graffiti. He'd made THX, and Gil Taylor walked across and said, what are you doing? And he said, I'm lining up the shots. He said, that's my job. You go and talk to the actors. And from then on, Gary Kurtz intermediary between them. Yeah, well, the whole crew was against us.
Right.
George says to this day, I was only 5 of us stuck by him to get that film made. And when we arrived in London in August and read the script, just said, we can't make this for the money that we had. But I have that kind of personality, and I love the script. I really like George, and I thought this is a chance to make, so I'm just going to find a way to do it.
So let's dive into that, because if the audience doesn't know, it's this idea of the used universe. That's what kind of separates Star Wars from Star Trek. It's a little dirty, it's a little banged up, it's been in space. It's a real thing.
Yeah.
And you really kind of spearheaded that initial push. What was the first prop or item that you kind of keyed into that you were like, that's what Star Wars is?
2 things. One is, so Fox wouldn't commit. He couldn't get the budget down. So George paid us, John Barry, myself, and Les Dilly, in a little tiny studio in London. We were there for 4 months before the film was greenlit. John Barry had said, C-3PO we know we can do. They did Metropolis. They got it to walk 3 steps. We knew another 25, 30 years on, we could make
5 or 6
C-3PO
steps,
walk. R2-D2, who was 4 foot, and we'd measured him out from the Ralph McQuarrie painting, there was no way to do it.
Right.
And the special effects head was always promising, oh, it's great, but we knew the radio control wouldn't work. Right. And so George got Kenny Baker, who was 3'8", and we decided we would make R2-D2 work. There was literally no money, so I got the Monty Python carpenter, who was a friend of mine, and I don't know if you know Holy Grail, but they couldn't afford horses, so they used coconut shells. So Bill could do things for nothing, and he had some wood at home, literally in the garage, and brought the wood in. It was marine ply, and we built it. And then he said, Roger, I can't do a top. And I went in the lighting company, and they had a scrap heap, and I found, this is where it all started, I found a top that I measured.
Oh my God.
And I also knew a set decorator, if I went to get it, they'd charge me more. So I sent Bill, the carpenter, round, and he got it for 10 shillings, he said.
Oh my God.
And we could not get Kenny to walk in it. So we got his boots in, and we stapled them inside the bottom of the legs. He still couldn't move it. And I thought, to show George, I went and got a handful of scrap, and there were the lights from an old decorator. I stuck that in, and that's still there to this day. Bill said, I can't do the arms on the front. He sent me home with a penknife. I carved that at home.
Oh my God.
And I'd got a fighter pilot's harness picked up with the junk, and we stapled that inside, and Benny and Kenny then could wear him like a rucksack.
Right.
He took the rate, and he took 3 steps with George and Gary watching before he fell over. Right. But that was the moment we knew Star Wars could be made, because they're the storytellers. They're the ones who run the whole thing, really. So we knew we could do that, and then I decided, okay, these weapons, I just have to find a way to do it. And I knew I couldn't afford them because of the budget, but I thought if I rented them all and adapted them, then I could give them back afterwards, and it was cheap. Right. So I went on my own. I didn't tell anyone. I knew the owner of the Baptist, the rental house. I said, I really love the Sterling submachine gun. To me, it's a sci-fi weapon. So I took that. I got my buyer, who wasn't employed then, but he came down with me, and he got me some T-strip, which he says, because there's a lot of questions about where the T-strip came from. I can only say that what he said was it was a draft excluder that went round the car where the hood or the bonnet was and kept the draft out. I had a roll of it, and I stuck that round the barrel to make it look different. I went in the back area of Baptist, and this was a huge place. They could armor an entire war. And they had boxes, and I found in the boxes these sights that were used in the war in Ireland, and so they looked pretty cool. I stuck it on it, and then I thought, well, he keeps saying Han Solo is a cowboy in space. He's Western, so I loved the Mauser. Again, I could have just used it, but I stuck more sights on that, put a flash hider on the end, and I called John Barry and said, you better come and have a look and bring George. So George came, and I thought, this is the moment. I'm on the right track, or I get fired now, and then, we'll get another set decorator. George, the thing is, you could fire them. Right. So you got a cloud of smoke and a light out of the barrel, which I thought, makes them look authentic. They all look used and old. George smiled. We never got, yes, that's great. I got a smile and an acceptance. And then he stayed with me, and I used so much super glue. He got covered in it with me as well. And we made Princess Leia's gun out of a starting pistol. That's how it all started. And then from then on, George never said anything. He never tells anybody what to do. He just relied on me bringing every single thing, everything, the sets. I had to take him down and show him what we were doing. The whole film like that. So every weapon, the land speeder. I mean, that was the second thing we did before Fox came involved. And John Barry designed a 4-seater. And to make it look a bit better, now Bill Harmon, the carpenter, had some wheelbarrow wheels at home, so we built it on his wheelbarrow wheels and made it out of sticks and polystyrene. And George looked at that and he said, no, it's too big. Luke would have a two-seater. And John Barry quite rightly had said, well, you've got R2-D2, C-3PO, Han Solo, and Obi-Wan Kenobi in there. And he said, no, we'll squeeze them in, don't worry. So we made a two-seater one, which it just happened that Gary Kurtz came down the time we showed George, and Bill Harmon had cut a motorbike in half, stuck it on the front, and the special effects had got a Volkswagen chassis, and he welded them together. George watched him do that and said, that's the worst bit of welding I've ever seen, Bill. And he said, well, I'm a carpenter, I'm not a welder. And they drove it down the studio in Lee Studios, and it crashed. The wing fell off.
Oh, my God.
And it was... Gary Kurtz's wife said, wow, boy, this sure ain't Hollywood, is it? But again, that's how it started.
So, if you didn't know, we talked Stormtrooper Blaster, we talked Han Solo's gun, Princess Leia's gun, and the Land Speeder, and R2-D2. That's already, you're like, okay, we got it. This is Star Wars. But then the lightsaber, I feel like, might have been one of the missing pieces to figure that out.
Yeah, it always was. In fact, because I wrote the book Cinema Alchemist because I'm the only one who did all of this. It was my job to do it, and there isn't anyone else. And then I've just finished this documentary I've made that goes into all of the details on this. And because I couldn't afford to make anything, design it, and have it made, and there wasn't the time, I decided to find found objects. And driving around London, I had a Mustang just to show you. And in those days, it was so big, but I loved the design of it. And I thought, you know what, if I go and rent scrap, buy bits of scrap airplanes, I can put it in the sets and make them look real. And again, because George made THX as an independent filmmaker, he always said, go and do it. Right. And so this idea of using scrap and junk kind of inspired me, and I saved a lot of money. Robert Watts, in the documentary I made, said Roger did all of this and saved our bacon because he did it so kind of enthusiastically with so little money. I decided, come now, the crew had started, we're well into it, and we had to be in Tunisia making the film in March, end of March, and I was sent out there with Les Dilly to get it all prepared. They were saying to me, you've got to have a lightsaber, it's part of the whole thing. So I realized the first day we would need is Luke's binoculars, so I had a room full of junk. Anything I could get and find, and I would go in and think, oh, I could use that. It was never like, there's a bit of junk, what I could use it for. I stuck 3 cameras together, bits of it was super glue, decided that to let an audience know what this was immediately visually, I stuck 2 camera lenses on the front. I went to buy them at a place that we got all our equipment from, and I said to David French, the manager, do you have anything? I've got to make this weapon, and have you got anything I could look at? So he said, well, have a look under there. There's some boxes. I haven't looked at those for years. First one I pulled out, I opened the lid. Well, I brought the other one I had at the table, the Graflex.
Oh, my gosh.
And there were, in tissue paper, there were these 3 Graflex handles, and I just went, oh, my God, there's a lightsaber. Because you couldn't tell what it was, but it was beautifully engineered. So I got the 3 of them, ran in my car back to the studio. I had some T-strip left over from the making the blaster, stuck that round, and then I unscrewed a calculator and found the bubble strip, and I didn't like the clip, so that fitted. And then I called George over and said, I think I found the lightsaber, George. And he held it, and again, a huge smile, and that was it. So $15 probably, I made the first one.
That's incredible. Most iconic. weapon in
Well,
movie
I knew,
history.
growing up, after the World Wars, and my father never spoke, and all of this, I lived in the worlds of King Arthur, and Excalibur is what you think of, and the power of the sword. And I knew when I read this script that this laser sword, it was called then, would represent Star Wars if I could get it right. I had to then do Obi-Wan Kenobi's, and again, each one I thought this suited Luke from a father's weapon. It had something about it. Obi-Wan's, he's a desert mystic. He reminded me of Merlin, and so in all the junk that I got, and I taught the prop men how to break down. And literally, I think for £50, I could buy about 10 or 12 Derwent jet engines. They were rotting in the rain. No one wanted any of this stuff. So there was, for some reason, I got it was called a rifle grenade, and it was a grenade you could fire out of a rifle, so it went further, and it had the stick on it. And we took that, a piece of my jet engine went on it, and a bit of the Graflex, and I don't know why, to make it look right, I put a tap end, a faucet you call them, that stuck on the end that looked right, and that was Obi-Wan Kenobi's. It had an older kind of look to it, and then Darth Vader's, I kind of got the special effects to help, and we found an MPP, which is a different version of this, but it had a black end, and it needed to look like the Death Star. It had to be very engineered and cold. So that was okay. To this day, and there's some things I'm doing now, but I never thought it justified that look when I saw Darth Vader walk in that corridor on the first day of shooting, and I thought, whoa, he deserves a better lightsaber than that.
Don't say that. The most iconic, isn't it? It's at prop store right now for one of the Vader hilts. It's like going to be millions of dollars because it's just an iconic piece of movie history.
Well, yeah, because we did Theory Sabers. I joined with.
Right.
Because I love his work, and he's so genuine and honest and puts back, and he's very much for the fans and what George did and everything. So he asked me if we could do the original one of this, which we did and released in January. And then he asked me to do another one. So it'll be coming in a few weeks, and it's called The Father.
Oh, who could that be?
Who
could that
possibly know
possibly
what that means in Hindi or German. I got a chance to finally do what I think he deserves.
Interesting. Okay. I'm excited to see what that looks like.
Yeah, it's fun. I love doing this stuff, and I'm doing my old job again.
I do want to, moving away from the lightsaber and moving into Tunisia, because you were on set, and as part of your job was also set decorator.
Yes.
And a lot of these things that we love about the original Star Wars that didn't exist. You had to physically put things in set dress. I'd be curious, when you get to Tunisia, the desert, what is almost the first thing that you have to do in order to start building Tatooine?
Well, John Barry designed Little Prince, so he knew Tunisia. It was incredibly cheap. No one went there. And when he saw Ralph McQuarrie's painting, he said, George, and he took George, and it solved a huge problem. It was very close to London. And he found the way to do Luke's homestead with these thousands of years old caves in Matmata, and then we built the other bit. Mm-hmm. And he didn't have to build much, John Barry. He found the cantina exit, he added domes on the top. My job was really to dress it to make it look like a used planet. Mm-hmm. So we started with the first scene we ever shot, and I had to get a load of robots made for the lineup. Mm-hmm. And R2-D2, before we went, and John sent Les Dilly and I to be in charge of the whole thing, of setting it up and getting it ready, and we were building the sandcrawler. We were building. I was driving like 14 hours between Jerba, where we were doing the cantina, and we were down in the desert right near border with Algeria.
Right.
It's a funny story. They're building the Sandcrawler, the huge set. The Algerians somehow had heard the war, and there's huge oil fields underneath. They thought Tunisia was building a weapon to attack. And one day a whole load of army arrived, and all these generals and everybody, and we had to convince them we were building a film set, not a real weapon. That was touch and go for a minute. Yeah. But and then we got through London. There was only one telephone. We got a message saying they were flooded. I had to drive 14 hours through the night to go and get the water out of the set and rebuild the cantina. It was stuff like that going on. But I was determined with the cantina to do, I thought, okay, we're doing a spaghetti western in space. I would like the outside to look like a hitching post. So we had one dewback, which we took around wherever we went. Right. We had about 2 of the big moisturizers, and they traveled around. And then there was whatever robots and vehicles we had, I just got them all brought up there. There was one round kind of, looked like a NASA, which I said, we'll put that in, don't worry about it, because John had dismissed it. And so we put the dewback in. No, this is farmers, they're very poor, right? So I was there, and they put the dewback hitched right outside his door. He came out, went back in with a huge club, came out yelling and whacking this thing, and its head moved, and dust was coming, so it looked even more real. Les Dilly and I were laughing our heads off, and he never, ever gave in. He came out with a club and threatened it every time, right until shooting. But
should have put him in the movie. Should have let him just...
Yeah, it's funny. We built... I used what I found really interesting. There were the warming cabinets that were part of airliners. I got loads of those. They're all over that set. And we were sticking bits in the walls just to make it look like the technology under the surface. And right before we went out to Tunisia, about 3 weeks before, I was called in the office with John Barry, and he said, listen, the radio control's not going to work. You're going to be miles in the desert. Build a lightweight R2-D2 that you can pull on fishing wire. Don't tell anyone.
Okay.
Put it on the truck. And the only person he told was Gary Kurtz. We kept it secret. First shot ever was R2-D2. And he came out and fell over, crashed, hit another robot, cut. And John Steers, the special effects man, who he always promised the Earth and made it look amazing what he was going to do, he ran in front of the crowd of us and all the whole crew and said, it's the blooming taxis. Now, this excuse worked in London. We were 3 hours away from the nearest outpost, up a desert track, everything. So Gary Kurtz said, can you get the one with filament, he called it. Les didn't know what that was, but we got it out. And from then on in, we drug a track, and any 3-legged version was pulled with fishing wire. And if you look at that scene, actually, with the buying the robots, it's all about R2-D2, but he's not in it that much. George is a very clever editor, and he knew which bits he could just take and make the scene work. The whole film was made with string and sealing wax, we call it in Britain. And it was interesting because when I did the documentary, David West Reynolds, on his own money, went back to Tunisia to find the locations, because at the end of the film, there was so little belief. Everything was junked. Right. There was nothing remaining. Rick McCullum had to go back on Phantom Menace and shoot, and there was no records. Right. So he got David West Reynolds, who'd gone on his own money and filmed using clips of the film. So David went back to the cantina, recognized one window and a dome. He found our door we'd made, and it was keeping the chickens in for the farmer. And then he found the dome upside down. He put water in it for the goats to feed.
Can you imagine Star Wars happening and then leaving props in the sand just for anyone for, what was that, probably 15 years, right, until he came back?
Yeah, one other thing, that set was beautiful. John found it by accident as he was leaving. He saw it from the car, went down, and there was the cantina with the domes. It looked science fiction. Right in the middle of it, where they're walking into the cantina, was an olive tree. And this, they're poor farmers. We couldn't cut that down, obviously. Right. So John designed a crashed spaceship, which was the size of a Boeing 747. Oh, yeah. So yeah. I knew I had to make that. It was just a wooden structure. And to save money, we'd found this early printing machine that could print plastic. And so the Death Star interiors in the studio are all these sheets. They were stapled up. I took a whole bunch of those. Everyone said I was nuts. Why are you taking scrap to Tunisia on the trucks? Because it was going through 5 countries. And I said, there isn't anything there. And I was using it everywhere. And I got these sheets pinned up. I got myself on a ladder, got a blowtorch and blew them down and created what looked like a crashed spaceship. But see, little did we know that precedent, if you look at Star Wars movies since then, they always have crashed spaceships in the, it became canon. And the other thing was, John Barry had drawn a skeleton when R2-D2 arrived. And I said, I can't afford a skeleton, I'm sorry, that's way beyond my budget. And the prop master one day gave me a torch and a key, and he said, look, the attic, we're throwing everything out. I need room. There was a full-size dinosaur skeleton from a Disney film, funny enough. And I got it down, put it in the parking lot, and that's it. That went to Tunisia, and we were able to put it up. At the end of my time there, Robert Watts said, listen, we don't have the money to take it back, leave it. And I said, are you sure? And he said, just leave it. So David West Reynolds went and found it.
A real archaeologist.
It took him, at the 6th day he was giving up, and some kid, part of the wandering Bedouin, came through on camels, and he just went as a last resource and said, skeleton, and the kid said, skeleton, skeleton, and he led them out 3 hours to where they were.
That's crazy.
So David got some of those now, which are in the Rancho Obi-Wan Museum.
The dream, to own a Krayt Dragon bone. I just want one of the bones.
Krayt Dragon. So that became the Krayt Dragon,
and
which
then
wasn't
it
to
showed up in Mandalorian,
us.
and it showed up everywhere, yeah.
It wasn't to us.
It was just a Disney dinosaur.
Yeah.
Moving from Tunisia, another major set that you helped craft was the Falcon, which obviously has become this enormous thing, and now you can walk through it at Disneyland. What was that? What were you trying to impart with the initial look and feel of the interior of the Falcon?
Well, I'd been on a submarine for some reason earlier on, and I noticed they were just crammed with stuff. There wasn't an inch of space, and it's not going to be like Star Trek. You're not going to sit in armchairs, and it's all going to be weight and usage and everything. It's not like that. So that was my idea. And John Barry had hired one of the art directors who did 2001, because that element was there, the contrast to the desert and Tatooine. And so he drew this set up as the cockpit. This is the first thing we ever did.
Right.
And
that's Lang?
Harry Lang.
Yeah.
So I used to go and watch him, and then I'd say, Harry, I'm going to come and mess this up. And he used to look at me because they called me boy. I was so young. Sure, he said, oh, you want boy? And finally, he said, okay, here's yours. So I took all his seats out, and I put in aircraft ejector seats from fighters, which look old. And then I was just sticking bits in and making it look more what I think it should have looked like, because the script says this is a pile of junk. And took George down. That was the first set ever we had to show him. So he smiled. And I said, George, listen, I like to personalize things, and you've always talked to him like he's a gambler in space, and he's gambled the ship, obviously. in American Graffiti, he had some big dice hanging in Ron Howard's car. So I said, I think we should hang some dice in here just to personalize it. So he said, oh, that's a good idea. I got him big fluffy ones down to little silver ones. He chose the silver ones, which was my choice, thank goodness, and we hung those in. The DP got fed up with them, took them out, so they're in only 1 or 2 scenes in Star Wars, then they disappeared. This became a long story because when he made The Rise of Skywalker, JJ had noticed them and got somebody to go out and source them, and they found some the same, put them in the set, that got cut out. So I was talking on Reddit, Ask Me Anything one, and she said, oh, there's a text come in here saying, have you seen the Vanity Fair cover? And we looked, and there they were in the set. So, you know, again, this little thing we added in the first one just for fun became so iconic because that's what Luke gives to Leia as a memory.
And then it becomes in Solo as well, kind of a major.
Yeah,
that's incredible. A final. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I said it was all just fun for me. Hard work, but fun. You know, doing stuff that you never think this is going to be an iconic thing. This is just something that makes something look used and real. And the Falcon itself, the Hold, which is my favorite set. I kind of convinced everybody using scrap would work, and it looked terrible. And I convinced the prop boys how to break stuff down. And in fact, you can't just stick it on walls. It has to be layered and look engineered. They kept putting it in, and I was buying more and more junk. Right. And it looked terrible until the day we finally got the end done and put in oil drips and little electroset and made it look real. And I could see people coming on the set like astonished at, where did you get this ship from? It looks so real. And so that was the day I knew, okay, I think what I promised is going to work.
Different, because you've mentioned a lot of your work with George, and he obviously really trusted you, both with the short film later for Empire, but then I would love to talk a little bit about your work as a second unit director on both Jedi and Phantom Menace, and how that differed, and what you did, and even, do you remember any of the scenes? Because even with Jedi, I think you worked on like pretty major moments of Return of the Jedi as the main director.
Yeah, what happened, I was waiting for the funding for my film, The Sender, the first film, and George was doing second unit and decided his least favorite is Empire because it's an adult movie and his movies are made for 12-year-olds. So he decided to do second unit himself, and then he made the decision that he really should spend more time with Richard Marquand on the main to make sure it was what he wanted, George. So they called me and said, what are you doing? I told them, and they said, well, can you come straight up and take over second unit? So I did. And it was, yeah, there was trust. The first scene I ever did, there's a massive fight in space where a jet engine, which they built the special effects, came through the set, crashed into the back of the set, and it was on 2 levels. There were 6 cameras, stuntmen, everything. Wow. They just said, here, take over. And I did a lot of Ewoks.
Hey, you gotta.
And I met Warwick Davis not so long ago, and I said, I was the one bossing you around when you were 11, making you do somersaults and dancing and doing all of that. But I kept begging George, can I please stop and go do something else? And he said, no, I love the Ewoks, please do more. I did 10 days of them. But my most treasured moment was he didn't have time to shoot Harrison coming out of the carbon freeze, so I got to shoot that moment, which is pretty major in Star Wars.
Yeah, I mean, it's beautiful.
A lot of stuff that I did on that one. And then when George was doing Phantom Menace, there there was some dispute over a credit, and they asked me to go to the ranch, Rick McCullum, and I met Rick in that day, and that's when he said, come on, George wants to see you. And I walked in the room, and George said, Rick, you know, there were only 5 people actually stuck by me to get Star Wars made, and I was one of those, and it was quite touching, really, for me. But the thing is that they said, come to London. So I went to Leavesden just to visit.
Yeah.
And I realized why. I went in, they'd chosen the designer then, because John Barry had died very young. Right. And they said, go and see Gavin. I walked to the office and said, how do I deal with George? He doesn't say anything. What do I do? And he was panicking like this. So I said, listen, George doesn't hire people and tell them what to do. He hires people and expects you to solve what can't be solved and give it to him. And if he doesn't like it or wants it changed, he'll tell you, and you just organize it. But otherwise, I said, just do it. Same with the set decorator who was in panic. And so I said, get on with it, you know, and do it. The DP, I'd started as a DP. I took him to Rome to do a huge commercial. And David said to me, why aren't you doing second unit? This film we have to shoot in 12 weeks. It's never going to get done. So I didn't thought about it, but I went to see Rick McCullum, and I said, what are you doing about second unit? He said, oh, we don't need it on this film. Ben Burt's going to do 2 shots for us, and that's it. And I thought, you're in denial. So I said, you know I love these films. Put my name down. Yeah. That's all I did. And then I went away, and then I was in London, and I got the call saying, what are you doing? I said, can you come here now? And I went up, met George and Gary, Rick. And George said, were you serious? And I said, you know I'm serious. I'm always serious with you. And they said, well, and I said, listen, I know with second units, my own second units, the thing with the second unit director, they're always trying to get a job. So they're trying to impress the producer, not do what the film wants. I explained how I did it with a little tiny remote camera, and I had a little portable viewer, how I got them to shoot. And George said, buy those right now, we'll do that. And then they said, okay, are you serious? Can you do it? And I said, yeah, I can. I got to go back to Vancouver and do this. And they said, no, you've got 5 minutes to decide. You have to start now if you're going to do it. So I made a few calls. The DP could do what I was going to do. And then they said, come with us. They already had an office, an assistant. Yeah. But I realized then the first shots we had to do, our unit, were the big Senate. Mm-hmm. So they said, you as second unit have to be first unit because we can't schedule it. And there were 6 times we were first unit. What Rick McCullum had done, they took the 2 crews from making Young Indy, who'd shot in 52 countries, I think, and they were so honed, the 2 crews, they leapfrogged. So George had 1 crew and I had the other crew, and he just divided the film in half. And I mean, I think anyone here can imagine my treasure moments. I got to shoot a lot of Darth Maul fights.
Oh, very cool.
And I was just in heaven.
Yeah. You saw Star Wars at its very beginning, and then you saw Star Wars when it was coming back. What was the same on a George Lucas set, and what had changed over those years?
Exactly the same. There were no producers telling him what to do, nobody complaining. There were no fights on Phantom Menace, ever, no arguments. And Rick McCullum told me, actually, George, you know, he paid for the films himself. The budget on that was $110 million. And it was exactly the same family atmosphere. I had kids on this set, and George did, and everything. Rick said, you know the difference? He said, I put it out to all the Hollywood studios and said, we may have to shoot in America. Could you budget it? Each budget came back at $400 million.
Wow.
And Rick told me as well, he said, because of what you did and on Alien, it became a huge industry. You cannot get scrap anymore. It was cheaper for them to go to the graveyards in Texas here.
Hey,
they bought airplane scrap here and flew it in a cargo plane, and that was cheaper than renting it.
Wow, that's crazy. Yeah. And then a Texas Instruments piece is in Is that the lightsaber?
Yeah,
So
it's called
another-
a Texas Instrument Calculator.
Right.
Yeah, that's in the that's
so here
this
you go.
bit here. It illuminates the numbers.
A Texas, Look
Yeah.
at that, another Texas. I do believe that's all the time we have. I do want, before we
sorry.
end, obviously Roger's at his booth, and he does have copies of his incredible book, Cinema Alchemist. I highly recommend it. We only scratched the surface of what stories he has, and I will say he was telling me, when it first came out, but a new edition has just come out featuring a foreword by George Lucas. So, pretty cool. Definitely check that out and see I'm excited to see what the father looks like as well. But everyone, please give it up for Mr. Roger Christian. Incredible.
Thank you.
Thank you.